Okay, sir, right up here.
President Biden, are you confident that the summit went well?
I'm always confident. We all are.
How was your conversations with the world leaders, sir?
Why don't you ask them later? Come on, let's get the picture.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Wait, leave it here. Wait. Up.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Sam, Chris is going to go first, right?
What's that?
Do I speak first or do you?
I'll do it first.
Go ahead.
They're going to take the pictures. I don't know if they want us to wait until they come out.
Okay. I don't think we have enough photographs.
Well, let me just welcome everyone to lunch and thank all of you. If I could just, Mr. President, exercise a point of personal privilege. I've gotten to know most of the people on this table over the last couple of months when you asked me to be your special envoy. And so I want to thank all of you here that either met on Zoom or we spent time together personally. And some I've known even longer than that, going back a number of years. And it's been a real honor, Mr. President. I thank you for asking me to do this, and it's been worthwhile. And I think the results of the last couple of days say more about the success of this summit. We've had a great meeting, and I think it's been in good part due to your leadership as well as the leadership of everyone sitting around this table. So I thank all of you for your assistance, your support, your understanding, the debates, the various other things we've had along the way. So I thank you all for that. What I thought we'd do, just to lay it out a little bit, so it'd be a working lunch. I want you to eat while we're sitting there talking as well, but a chance to have the benefit of sharing your thoughts and ideas with us here. I'm going to ask the President if he'd share a couple of thoughts to begin with, and then turn to the regional leaders in various subject matters to give some opening remarks and ask everyone to try and keep it as short as possible without being lacking the substance, so that we can get to that open conversation. That this is a unique meeting in many ways. There's not staff here, it's just us in this room. And so it gives us an opportunity to share some thoughts along the way. So with that, I think we can start here. I think we're done with the press had enough photographs?
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to get into that stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
She's good. Yeah, the guy's meeting with Alaskans.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see everyone. And I don't want to be the only thing standing between you and, I guess it's lunch. Well, yes, we're in Latin America, so it's lunch. Wonderful to see everyone here today, and thank you all for joining for lunch. Folks will be flying home in just a few hours. And that's actually when the real work begins, implementing, doing what we said we would do here at the summit. But I just wanted to take a minute to say, first of all, how grateful we are that everyone here has put so much into making this summit a success. What we've accomplished in Los Angeles is the result of months of consultation and coordination among all of our teams. And now, as I said, we have to make good on our pledges and turn them into concrete progress. And to do that, we have to keep the collaboration going. So I hope we can take the spirit that we have here and work together to turn it into real results. I wanted to say a few words about the Joint Summit Working Group organizations, because you will play a key role in making this happen. This, as you know, is a network of regional and international institutions that gives critical technical guidance and other support for summit commitments across our hemisphere. Cite a few examples. Last month, the Pan American Health Organization launched a new information platform for our countries to share data on public health and on migration so that we can better meet the medical needs of migrants, from COVID-19 to pre- and postnatal care. Last year, the Caribbean Development Bank, another joint working group organization, helped to mobilize $80 million to support the pandemic response in the Caribbean. The Organization of American States played a critical role in the Energy and Climate Partnership that came out of the 5th Summit of the Americas back in 2009, holding more than 40 technical meetings, workshops, policy dialogues to advance renewable energy and to mitigate the dangerous effects of climate change across our region. Speaking of the OAS, we have a law in the United States known as the OAS Legislative Engagement Act. And that calls for the creation of a forum for legislators across the hemisphere to increase their participation in OAS activities. We have a bipartisan team of U.S. senators led by Senator Ben Cardin, Senator Roger Wicker, who are helping to drive that process. Many of the members of Congress here today will be part of that endeavor, and we're grateful for that. Having elected officials from across our region become more involved in the OAS, a leading institution for supporting democracy in the Americas, that will make its work stronger. Speaking for the United States, we look forward to working with partners across the region to carry out the initiatives that our leaders announced in these days. This includes the America's Health Corps to train 500,000, I'm going to repeat that number, 500,000 health professionals across the region over the next 5 years. Imagine what that can do to lift the foundation of healthcare across our region, not only in dealing with potentially future pandemics, but in, day out healthcare for all the peoples of our region. 500,000 trained workers. A digital agenda for transformation in the Americas to try to increase access to digital tools, to training and opportunities. That too has tremendous potential to bridge the digital divide, to connect small businesses to the marketplace, to bring education to students where it's needed. The Cities Forward initiative to direct more support to cities, because we know that's where so much innovation and problem solving is actually taking place. Parenthetically, I think as many of you know, next year we're going to have our first Cities Summit of the Americas. Denver will host it because, again, so much is happening at a local municipal level. We want to tap into that. On these and all the ambitious initiatives that our country's made, we will lean on our joint working group partners to actually make them real, to actually produce concrete results. So that's why we wanted to convene one more time before leaving California, so we can get started on hammering out our next steps. Let me again say how much I've appreciated our time together here in Los Angeles. It has been inspiring, it's been energizing, and I think seeing representatives come together from across the region, not just from government, as important as that is, but from civil society, from the private sector, young people, international organizations, all driven by a fundamental desire to deliver results that'll make a real difference in the lives of our people, to actually be responsive to what our citizens demand, what they're looking for. Last word. The theme of this summit, building a sustainable, resilient, equitable future. That speaks to many of the challenges facing our countries, from climate to COVID to building stronger economies. But we throw these words around: sustainable, resilient, equitable. They have a real meaning, and that's important. We need to focus on what they actually mean. So, we seek a sustainable future through long-term investments, not just expensive short-term fixes, on energy, on economic development, and so much else, so that we have a real and durable foundation for progress that can pay off not just in the next months, but over many years and over many decades. We seek a resilient future. And that simply means that our governments and our societies will be better placed to respond to crises of all kinds, to do it swiftly, to do it capably, learning from the lessons of the past to try to protect our people and help them get back on their feet when emergencies happen. And we seek an equitable future. And that simply means that everyone, no matter where they live, no matter who they are, have access to economic, social, educational opportunities and are treated with equal respect and dignity. That is the meaning of those words, and now our challenge is to make them real, to make them concrete, to make genuine progress. It's a shared vision for the hemisphere that we share. And as President Biden said on Wednesday, there has never been a greater need for cooperation, for common purpose, and yes, for transformative ideas. Here in Los Angeles, we've actually deepened that cooperation. We've affirmed a common purpose, and we're embracing transformative ideas, which we now have to turn into lasting progress. That's what the partnerships represented in this room are charged with now. And as we think about leaving Los Angeles, I can say that we've come together for 3 days. I'm looking forward to the next 362 days. And then the 365 days after that, and after that, when we demonstrate that what we did here is going to bring real positive change in the lives of our people. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's carry on the work. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence all mobile devices. Our program will begin momentarily.
Welcome to the third and the final plenary session of the 9th Summit of the Americas. The chair would like to now recognize Ishley Williams, representative of Humana People to People Belize and representative of the Civil Society Forum.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Shelley Williams Parshu, and I am a proposal writer and the public relations officer for Humana People to People Belize, and a proud representative of Belize. On the situation of migration in the Caribbean. Over the last 1.5 centuries, countries in the Caribbean have become top destinations for immigration towards Northern America, mainly the US and Europe, and intra-regional migration. Studies have shown that most migration situations are a direct result of persons wanting to better their lives and the lives of their families through acquiring financial and social capital, by improving their economic situation, by accessing higher wages in host communities, fleeing from wars, crime, and violence in their home countries, or bridging familial ties to join family members who have already settled in other countries. Some countries experiencing immense migration for either destination or transit include less developed islands to more developed islands, like the Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados, among others, and transit countries like Belize. Caribbean countries have signed on to numerous conventions and policies, such as the Migration for Employment Convention, the International Labor Organization, and the International Organization for Migrant Conventions, and the Refugee Conventions, among others, to allow people to migrate to the Caribbean countries to create opportunities for themselves, for work, and to look after the rights of migrants. Also, the IOM has made an effort to build a presence in most of these host countries. With support from donors like the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and the International Organization for Migration, host countries have been implementing integration and assistance programs for migrants in the region. However, there is still much work to be done. Here are a few recommendations coming out of the Caribbean. There's a need for support for stay programs that respond to the reduction of crime, violence, and corruption, among other factors that causes persons to migrate. Support for the facilitation of integration programs, particularly through building networks and collaboration among agencies working toward the same goal, and organizing for training, exchanges, and activities, as well as assisting to identify funding agencies. Development and enforcement of migration policies that respond to the needs of persons at risk of migrating and that holds governments accountable in ensuring that migrants' application processes are easy, transparent, and result-oriented. The extension of amnesty programs that are inclusive, open, and time-oriented. In most countries, there is a large demand for migrants in industries, particularly the agriculture sectors. Thus, the OAS can be instrumental in facilitating work permit processes to meet the needs of industries and the people. Also, the implementation of migrant worker programs where people are recruited in a more systematic way that ensures proper vetting is conducted, possibly through labor program exchanges and bilateral agreements that could be formed between countries for the exchange of labor and services. All this should be done keeping in mind the protection of the migrant and the businesses, avoiding the violation of rights. This would then result in countries having an efficient recruitment program inclusive of proper screening processes. Next, protect vulnerable and especially exposed groups such as Afro-descendant and indigenous communities, corruption whistleblowers, environmental and human rights defenders, the LGBTIQ+ communities, people with disabilities, children, women, adolescents, young people, older adults, migrants, refugees, stateless persons, academics, journalists, and in situation of mobility. Achieve a regional agreement on migration, refugee, and internal displacement that also takes structural measures to prevent the expulsion and exodus of migrants and respect the rights of political asylum and international protection. And lastly, make progress in the creation of a migrant framework for the Americas that makes it possible to respond from a rights-based approach to the challenges of migration, refugee, and internal displacement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. The chair would like to now recognize His Excellency Kenneth Darrow, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Commonwealth of Dominica.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Heads of states and delegations, ministers, fellow delegates, good evening. It is with a deep sense of pride that I address you here today, and I feel extremely privileged to be part of this important and timely summit, one which provides the member states of the Western Hemisphere the opportunity to deliberate on and seek solutions to the multitude of developmental, social, and existential issues facing our countries, our region, our world. Madam Chair, this summit is being held at a time of great upheaval in our region and, of course, the rest of the world, caused by the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. A pandemic which has severely compromised our health systems and resulted in severe economic and social hardships for our populations. The ongoing conflict in Europe has led to a sharp increase in food commodity and fuel prices, and the continued threat of non-communicable diseases to the collective health of our people are among the many other challenges that we face. And of course, the ever-present threat of climate change and its adverse effects on the economic landscape of our countries. And in our case, the Commonwealth of Dominica, we lost 320% of our gross domestic product, having been hit by two major storms within just 2 years of each other. Madam Chair, unfortunately, none of the issues I outlined await their turn. This multiplicity of issues have been happening simultaneously, each exacerbating the other. And one can only appreciate the enormity of the consequences if one lives through them. And we in the Caribbean region will live through them on a daily basis. In fact, just a week ago, June 1st, marked the beginning of the official hurricane season. Yes, we do have an official hurricane season. A 6-month anxiety-filled period every year from June to November, where we hope and pray that none of the inclement weather events forming the Atlantic makes landfall, and thereby adding pressure to our already weakened economies. Madam Chair, at this 9th Summit of the Americas, there is an ultra-urgent need to offer hope to our citizens, as we small island developing states contend with the social and economic inequalities, rising unemployment, limited and declining access to concessional development financing, and public health emergencies. These common challenges highlight the importance for urgent and increased partnership amongst member states, and the need for inclusion and unity of purpose towards a pathway of peace, safety, and security based on cooperation and mutual understanding. Madam Chair, the real value of this summit in your beautiful city of Los Angeles must be that it serves as a platform for mutually beneficial exchanges to address our common issues. And this calls for a new approach to collaboration and economic alliances founded on the principles of solidarity, cohesion, and camaraderie, and respect for our sovereignty as individual states. At this juncture in our history, marked by such deep concern for children's future and the future of the planet, I am impelled to speak of my lingering and deep disappointment over the exclusion of some leaders in our region from the summit. The equitable future which we are seeking to build cannot be achieved if we continue to create the grounds for discord and disunity to thrive. The deed is done this time, but I reiterate our appeal for the full participation of Cuba and Venezuela, and indeed of every country in our region, in the process of addressing the dire issues faced by our countries and the people of the Americas. In order for our deliberations to hit the intended mark, Madam Chair, in order for our presence here to truly transform and enhance lives, for the decision-making to be relevant and timely, and for the people of the Americas to feel the positive impact of our leadership, we must be open to greater participation and consideration for the views of all. Madam Chair, many Caribbean states, including the Commonwealth of Dominica, have long enjoyed friendly relations with the Republic of Cuba and benefited from its exceptional record of humanitarianism, particularly in the areas of health and education. And many of us would not have been able to face the COVID-19 pandemic head-on as we did, had it not been for the timely interventions of our sister nation of Cuba. We look forward to the day when the Republic of Cuba receives the respect it truly deserves and is once again allowed a seat at the table to assist in forming solutions to our region's most persistent problems. Madam Chair, the Commonwealth of Dominica applauds the efforts of your administration toward reversing some of the unjust and harsh measures imposed on the Cuban people by the former administration, and the indication of the willingness of Washington to resume talks with Havana. And quite frankly, Madam Chair, what better opportunity would have been than at this summit, together with the rest of the OS family, where you could signal to the world the seriousness of your intentions. Madam Chair, the resumption of visa processing in Havana, the recommencement of flights to other major cities in Cuba, and the increase in quantum and ease of remittances that can be sent to the Cuban people by their families here in the US are indeed all commendable measures, but quite bluntly, they are still not enough. Which is why I would like to reiterate Dominica's call for the lifting of the unjust economic embargo on the Cuban people, one which has brought about tremendous hardship to the island nation over the past 6 decades or so. These sanctions should be lifted if we are to see any meaningful move towards enhanced peace, stability, and economic growth in the Western Hemisphere. Dominica also calls for the removal of Cuba from the state-sponsored terrorism list. Madam Chair, Dominica and the rest of the OECS sub-region appreciates the regional security system and the work that they do in combating drug and human smuggling, among other crimes, in addition to being the first responders after natural disasters. But much more needs to be done. We have noticed with much alarm the drastic increase in the interception of small guns at our ports of entry, originating from the mainland USA, and this needs some urgent attention. Dominica would also like to place on the record our appreciation to President Biden and Vice President Harris for making the time to listen to the unique concerns of the CARICOM member states, and for the candid and frank discussions we have had leading up to and at this summit. Madam Chair, and although we have been your third border from the beginning of time, we were indeed beginning to feel like the neglected neighbors in the region until yesterday. Hence, we welcome the U.S. commitment to work with the hemisphere on addressing the urgent issues of food security, access to financing, and energy security in the region, and accepting our recommendations and the setting up of committees to develop these short-term solutions. We also applaud the efforts of Vice President Harris on the launching of the U.S.-Caribbean Partnership to address the climate crisis, PAC 2030, an initiative which hopefully should see an increased access to concessional and grant financing to better the region's climate resilience infrastructure, including renewable energy. Madam Chair, Dominica is cautiously optimistic that these initiatives will bear fruit and not remain as glossy political, aesthetically pleasing outcome documents as we've seen and experienced time and time again. We are confident, however, that the Hemisphere will use this opportunity of this summit to set the foundation for the creation of a more hopeful future for our citizens, guided by the basic principles of peace, equality, freedom, self-determination, and justice. And we will remain a champion for the goals of multilateralism to strengthen regional and international cooperation by sharing ideas, engaging on the way forward, and listening to the views of all, even those we do not agree with. Finally, we are guided by the OAS Charter, which promotes respect for sovereignty and the strategic cooperation among our countries. With this in mind, Madam Chair, I urge all of us to work in an equitable, inclusive manner to identify effective measures to ensure stability and deliver sustainable growth for our people and countries. I thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The Chair now recognizes Her Excellency Alexandra Hill, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of El Salvador.
Excelentísima señora Presidenta de la Novena Cumbre de las Américas, excelentísimos señores jefes de Estado y de Gobierno, excelentísimos jefes de delegación, señoras y señores, hermanos de América. El Salvador asiste a esta novena edición de la Cumbre de las Américas convencido de que la búsqueda de soluciones reales a nuestros desafíos históricos de las Américas precisa de un diálogo respetuoso y constructivo. La Cumbre de las Américas fue concebida como un espacio para lograr consensos, crear sinergias y tomar decisiones estratégicas que contribuyan a que nuestro hemisferio avance hacia el desarrollo y bienestar de nuestra gente, especialmente de la más vulnerable. Luego de 28 años de cumbres, nuestros pueblos aún esperan y aspiran soluciones reales a desafíos transnacionales que afectan su vida cotidiana. En esta oportunidad, nuestros anfitriones nos han convocado a considerar el tema construyendo un futuro sostenible, resiliente y equitativo. Pero, ¿cómo podemos aspirar a un futuro sostenible? Antes de ello, debemos comenzar por construir una genuina y verdadera solidaridad entre nuestros pueblos, nuestros estados y nuestros gobiernos ahora. Los organismos multilaterales del hemisferio deben refundarse o estarán condenados a perder toda credibilidad, toda legitimidad, en el mejor de los casos y en el peor de los casos, a desaparecer por completo. Señoras y señores, El Salvador de hoy es un país que pone por delante su soberanía, la libertad y la dignidad de su pueblo. El 1 de junio pasado, el gobierno de mi presidente Bukele cumplió 3 años de gestión a través de la cual hemos combatido de manera frontal las viejas prácticas de los poderes fácticos que por décadas acumularon riqueza y poder para pocos, manteniendo a toda una población anclada en ciclos de pobreza, de violencia, de exclusión y de inequidad. El fortalecimiento, el ejercicio efectivo y la consolidación de la democracia son nuestros pilares fundamentales sobre los cuales gira el proceso transformador de mi país. Muchos sectores nacionales e internacionales, incluso a nivel de gobierno, han cuestionado la democracia salvadoreña sin reconocer o tomarse el tiempo de reconocer el contexto ni entender la complejísima realidad de nuestro país, sin rigor histórico ni académico. Pero han guardado silencio ante atrocidades en otras partes del mundo. Este patrón de comportamiento no contribuye a que la relación entre estados y de estados con instituciones sea constructiva en beneficio de nuestros más vulnerables. El ejercicio democrático y de Estado de Derecho en mi país está orientado a brindar solución y respuesta a las demandas de nuestra población más vulnerable en materia política, social, económica y cultural. La deuda histórica de nuestro Estado se está saldando, a donde no estamos aún a donde queremos, pero en 3 años hemos avanzado más que en las 3 décadas, o sea, más que en los 30 años anteriores. Nuestra prioridad ha sido y será siempre solventar las necesidades de nuestra gente, de todos y cada uno de los salvadoreños. Estamos impulsando un proceso de transformación en cuanto al enfoque de gobernanza a partir de un estado de bienestar que privilegia al más vulnerable y a la persona humana y al bien común sobre todo. Las acciones de mi gobierno ratifican con amplitud de escrutinio el Estado de Derecho, es un elemento esencial de la democracia. La oposición política y sus alianzas locales y externas pretenden, sin fundamento ni éxito, hacer creer lo contrario. En mi país heredamos desafíos centenarios, una democracia que en realidad no era democracia y que fue responsable de tantas y tantas generaciones perdidas. Por ello, nuestro gobierno impulsa una democracia efectiva en la que todo el quehacer del Estado está en función de las mayorías a fin de generar oportunidades, prosperidad y desarrollo. En junio del 2019 iniciamos una etapa crucial en nuestra historia. Estamos afrontando y superando deudas históricas en materia de subdesarrollo, corrupción, inseguridad e impunidad. La pandemia puso al descubierto nuestra extrema precariedad del sistema de salud de mi país y más aún nos confrontó con una oposición política intransigente que a través de decretos y resoluciones inconstitucionales le quitó poderes al gobierno para decidir sobre la salud de nuestra gente. A pesar de ello, fuimos capaces de estructurar un mecanismo de atención y respuesta que se tradujo en seguridad sanitaria para toda nuestra población. Los resultados están a la vista de todos. Por eso obtuvimos incluso un gran reconocimiento a nivel internacional. El Salvador ha emprendido un camino sin retorno. No descansaremos hasta lograr la transformación política, económica, social y cultural de nuestro país que permita la construcción de una sociedad justa, democrática y próspera para todos los salvadoreños. No daremos marcha atrás, a pesar de que ello suponga vencer retos monumentales y recibir señalamientos tendenciosos y sesgados. A 3 años de gestión de mi gobierno, los aciertos y logros alcanzados son evidentes. El firme apoyo y aprobación popular son el mejor indicador de ello, el más grande en la historia republicana de mi país. No es casualidad que el presidente Nayib Bukele, con los resultados de su liderazgo, cuente con una evaluación más que positiva que trasciende toda frontera, lo cual nos inspira como salvadoreños a seguir trabajando por el desarrollo y justicia social de nuestro país. Señoras y señores, la pandemia significó un antes y un después para el mundo. La salud y la resiliencia continúa siendo un reto, no solo para las Américas, sino que para el resto del mundo. El Salvador es un referente regional en el manejo de la pandemia, tanto por acciones preventivas, de administración sanitaria, campañas de inoculación e infraestructura hospitalaria, según fue reconocido por representantes de la Organización Mundial de la Salud en el año 2021. La pandemia, por otro lado, aceleró los cambios en materia digital y de un problema surgió una transformación, un paso histórico para nuestra sociedad, donde hemos cerrado la brecha digital. Ahora, todos nuestros estudiantes del sistema público de educación tienen tablets y laptops con conexión gratuita a Internet para facilitar sus actividades académicas. Bajo la visión de nuestra primera dama, Gabriela de Bukele, también hemos priorizado las necesidades de nuestros niños y niñas con discapacidad, entregándoles herramientas tecnológicas adaptadas para cada uno de ellos. Gracias a su liderazgo, nos hemos compartido en un país referente en diversas áreas que buscan el bienestar de los salvadoreños desde antes de su nacimiento. Ahora tenemos un marco legal innovador que permite brindar atención especializada a las mujeres embarazadas y a los neonatos como nunca antes, con la ley Nacer con Cariño para un parto respetado y un cuidado cariñoso y sensible para nuestros recién nacidos. Además, hace unos días, el despacho de nuestra primera dama presentó ante la Asamblea Legislativa el anteproyecto de ley Crecer Juntos, que garantizará la atención a nuestra primera infancia, niñez y adolescencia, como estrategia para garantizar su protección y atención integral desde los primeros años de vida. Otro tema trascendental es el cambio climático, por lo que comprometernos a abordarlo de manera contundente como región es vital para la existencia de la humanidad. No obstante, esos compromisos serán letra muerta si no se dispone de las voluntades políticas y de los recursos necesarios que permitan enfrentar de manera realista esa grave amenaza. En materia migratoria, el enfoque de El Salvador parte de una realidad. Somos un país de origen, de tránsito, de destino y de retorno. En segundo lugar, asumimos el compromiso de atender las causas estructurales, las causas reales que originan la migración, lo cual ha dado como resultado que desde el 2019 seamos el país con menor cantidad de llegadas a las fronteras de Estados Unidos y de México. Nuestro fin último es que la migración se considere como una opción y no como la única alternativa para resolver las carencias de desarrollo y seguridad de nuestra gente. Señora Presidenta de la 9ª Cumbre, mi país está dispuesta a trabajar con todos y cada uno de los países de las Américas, en la medida en la que exista un respeto a nuestra dignidad de Estado. Transformar un país que fue recibido en deplorable decadencia política, económica y social ha requerido de un inmenso liderazgo, tenacidad y de medidas drásticas. Este es el modelo de éxito que define a mi presidente Nayib Bukele. Los logros que hemos alcanzado en 3 años de gestión son significativos. Por primera vez, desde que nos convertimos en república, en El Salvador se respira esperanza, paz, deseo de progreso y de permanencia de nuestra gente. Nos queda aún mucho camino por recorrer, muchos obstáculos por superar, pero no vamos a dar ni un paso atrás. El Salvador está abierto para trabajar de la mano, hombro a hombro y con el acompañamiento de aquellos socios, amigos y aliados que nos respeten, que nos entiendan y nos vean como a un país soberano. Que Dios bendiga a nuestros pueblos, a todos los líderes y a todos nuestros países de las Américas. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Minister Hill. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Nicholas Steele, Minister for Health and Social Security of Grenada.
Madam Chair, distinguished heads of government and heads of delegations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings from my Prime Minister, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, and the government and people of Grenada. The Prime Minister sends his regrets. He would have loved to have attended the summit, but we are within 2 weeks of elections. And those elections on the 23rd of June, you will all agree, the democratic process supersedes the multilateral. Let me place on record my delegation's gratitude to our hosts for the hospitality and the excellent arrangements for this summit. We are happy to attend in person, though cautious, as we slowly emerge from COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, the overarching theme of this summit, building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future, is reminiscent of the themes chosen by our administration to celebrate Grenada's 47th anniversary of independence in 2021, rebuilding together a safer, more resilient nation in these challenging times, and our 48th theme in 2022, overcoming adversity, safeguarding livelihoods, protecting futures. This summit presents an opportunity for Grenada to join with nations in the Americas to focus our collective efforts on ways to address the challenges placed on our individual countries by the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the effects of climate change, and the other crises that we face. These lay bare before us our vulnerabilities and leave our administrations grappling with a citizenry that requires social protection, physical protection, energy and health security, and fiscal and environmental protection, based on the realities of their lived experiences. Excellencies, Grenada acknowledges that the 5 political commitments are a consolidated series of ambitious objectives that would guide our agenda and serve as a roadmap for the hemisphere over the next few years. And we commend our national summit coordinators and diplomats who negotiated then, over these past few months, the Summit Implementation Review, or SIRG group. These commitments provide an opportunity for governments to accept the responsibility of safeguarding the welfare of its citizens by strengthening democratic institutions, providing economic opportunities, leveraging the use of technology in development, and ensuring inclusion in all our programs. Excellencies, we cannot deny that the geopolitical landscape of the Americas has changed since the first summit in Miami almost 30 years ago in 1994. That said, Grenada takes seriously its commitment to uphold the principles of democratic governance. We strongly avow to closing the digital divide to realize the fulfillment of a regional agenda for digital transformation, which provides value to the average citizen. We are committed to implementing the Action Plan on Health and Resilience in the Americas and support the implementation of the climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies of our green future. Grenada commits to incorporating fairness into any sustainable energy transition plan and projects that we undertake. Excellencies, to achieve these objectives, small island developing nations and low-lying coastal states like Grenada must have access to concessionary financing. We call on all of our friends in this hemisphere to assist in identifying, developing, and advancing specific, distinct climate finance access windows for us. Excellencies, this is not a new call. every small island developing state supports such an initiative. We thank the United States for the initiative announced, the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, which will benefit the countries of the entire region. Grenada believes in the multilateralism and is eager to move from talk to action to provide a more inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous future for our people and build on hemispheric solidarity. Grenada is mindful, however, that each sovereign nation must act and be guided according to its individual circumstance, its resources, and within its own legal framework. We, however, ask the following: how meaningful can discussions on resilient health systems be without the presence of Cuba at the table? Undeniably, the country that has the most to offer with respect to human resource in health. Likewise, is it possible to have meaningful conversations on energy security without Venezuela, the country with one of the largest petroleum reserves, being present? COVID-19 taught us that we are all in this together. How can we then start our first significant hemispheric gathering on a policy of exclusion instead of the lessons of inclusion? Excellencies, we grow tired of having the same objections and making similar requests. Please let us turn a new leaf today. There is one hungry child in almost all of our capital cities that we will have to look at and into those sorrowful eyes when we return and answer in the hearts of our hearts whether we made a difference today. That her tomorrow is a better and safer one because of what we did today. How many families are losing their savings because of the inflation and will not be able to send their children to university anymore because we are slow? What do we tell them? And finally, if there is another global pandemic in our lifetime, history will not forgive us. After dealing with the immediate, we must still tackle the existing threats of climate change, as well as access to rational financing for mitigation and sustainable development. I speak frankly and directly among friends, because that is what friends should do. I thank you and look forward to the meaningful progress as we continue to meet as one people, one hemisphere. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Steele. The chair now yields to Senator Dodd, my fellow special advisor for the 9th Summit, to preside as chair. Senator?
What is right now? Where are the people here being introduced? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And the chair now recognizes His Excellency Mario Adolfo Bucaro Flores, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Guatemala. Mr. Minister, welcome.
Honorable Senador Christopher Dodd, asesor especial de esta 9ª Cumbre de las Américas. señoras y señores delegados, ministros y miembros de esta importante cumbre, quiero reconocer públicamente al excelentísimo señor Joseph Biden, Jr., presidente de los Estados Unidos de América, al excelentísimo señor Luis Almagro Lenes, secretario general de la Organización de los Estados Unidos Americanos, OEA, en especial también al señor secretario de Asuntos Hemisféricos de OEA, el embajador James Lambert, y también al señor Anthony Blinken, secretario de Estado de los Estados Unidos de América. Señoras y señores, jefes de Estado de los gobiernos de América y señoras y señores, observadores e invitados especiales. Es para mí un honor presentar un fraternal saludo en nombre del pueblo y el gobierno de Guatemala. Agradezco la invitación extendida por el presidente de los Estados Unidos de América y especialmente a los ciudadanos de Los Ángeles por aceptarnos y acogernos en tan importante y bella ciudad. Después de 28 años, nos reunimos nuevamente en los Estados Unidos de América, donde inició este proceso cuyo objetivo fue sostener diálogos, reorganizar las relaciones interamericanas adaptadas a la variación de las condiciones políticas, económicas y sociales del mundo en nuestra región. Celebramos que esta 9ª Cumbre de las Américas tenga como propósito principal promover la construcción de un futuro sostenible, resiliente y equitativo para el hemisferio, y que el centro de nuestras deliberaciones se tome en la construcción de una región con bases sólidas, inclusivas, sostenibles para todos los países de la región. Guatemala reafirma su compromiso de seguir trabajando con toda la región con el fin de lograr una prosperidad económica, seguridad, derechos humanos y dignidad para todos nuestros pueblos. Señor presidente, a poco más de 2 años del inicio de la pandemia, nuestros países han tenido la oportunidad para reflexionar, compartir experiencias y trabajar en planes de acción frente a las situaciones cambiantes que exigen deliberaciones hacia la construcción de una región unificada con bases sólidas. Mi país se ha pronunciado en cada espacio multilateral demandando la necesidad de renovar el compromiso para avanzar hacia el desarrollo verdadero y sostenible de estas Américas. Por ello, permítame comentar sobre algunos de los temas que son prioridad en esta cumbre y que estamos discutiendo, como la reactivación económica, la vulnerabilidad al cambio climático, la lucha contra el narcotráfico y especialmente la seguridad internacional. Señor presidente, después de la histórica caída de 7.7 del PIB regional anunciado por la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe, CEPAL, hoy representamos el efecto de lo que han generado más de 120 años de un efecto importante de unidad entre las Américas para trabajar en la reconstrucción económica, la democracia y la reactivación de los pueblos. Por eso, hoy nos volvemos a juntar, casi 120 años después, para ver que la realidad ha demandado el fortalecimiento de lazos y alianzas no solo entre los gobiernos, sino especialmente con el sector privado y otros actores relevantes con el fin de contrarrestar el impacto negativo de la economía y avanzar hacia el desarrollo creativo y competitivo. Mi país, con una población aproximada de 17 millones de personas y un PBI de casi 78,000 millones, es una de las economías más grandes y resilientes de las Américas, pero especialmente de Centroamérica. La pandemia afectó la economía de nuestro país como sucedió en todo el mundo, pero tomando medidas apropiadas, Guatemala experimentó una de las menores contracciones del PBI, gracias a que el estímulo fiscal del gobierno para responder fue rápido y contundente en el año 2020 y se centró en proteger a su población más vulnerable. En el marco de los esfuerzos de cooperación público-privada, Guatemala está implementando el plan Guatemala no se detiene, cuya agenda tiene un impacto directo en la recuperación, reconstrucción, seguridad y desarrollo. Este plan se consolidó en el año 2021 y ha superado las expectativas. El PBI registró un crecimiento del 8% según el Banco Mundial. Esto representa la tasa más alta de crecimiento en los últimos 40 años. En el año 2021, Guatemala también registró la mayor recaudación fiscal de su historia, al situarse en una de las más altas de nuestra historia, porque fueron más de 77,000 millones de quetzales, lo que representó el 21.3% de nuestra recaudación prevista y que no teníamos cómo poder medir sobre los impactos de la pandemia. Pero ese compromiso de todos los guatemaltecos y el sector privado y todos unidos para alcanzar un futuro nos permitió también generar un déficit que se fue superado sobre la base de que hoy tenemos la inflación menor en el año 2021 con tan solo un 3.5 de inflación. Y así disminuimos también nuestra deuda externa e interna, y todo lo anterior fue resultado de las acertadas políticas implementadas por el gobierno del señor presidente Alejandro Yamatei y que han sido reconocidas por el Fondo Monetario Internacional y por las agencias calificadoras de riesgo. En resumen, nuestros indicadores macroeconómicos siguen siendo bastante favorables para la estabilidad económica del país y la atracción de inversiones. Hoy les puedo decir orgullosamente, Guatemala es un socio confiable. Solo en el año pasado triplicamos la meta de la inversión extranjera directa con más de 3,000 millones de dólares y que se traducen en más de 40,000 empleos formales nuevos y de alta calidad. El crecimiento económico del país también se debe al incansable trabajo de los migrantes guatemaltecos con las inyecciones de capital que representan las remesas familiares y a las cuales hoy debemos nuestra estabilidad, pero especialmente el profundo agradecimiento de todo el pueblo de Guatemala para aquellos que hoy se esfuerzan. Nuestros migrantes, que contribuyeron con un importante flujo de remesas de más de 15,000 millones de dólares, que muestran un incremento del 35% respecto al año 2020. Señor presidente, es para mí imposible pensar estar en Los Ángeles y en esta visita tan importante, en el lugar donde se encuentra la mayor comunidad de migrantes guatemaltecos y no pronunciarme conforme respecto al tema migratorio. Al mismo tiempo, también es imposible pensar que podemos solucionar el tema de manera transversal en la región sin tomar en cuenta las realidades de cada país. La migración no se soluciona imponiendo agendas unilaterales. No debemos olvidar que el beneficio será para ambos, especialmente en ambos lados de la frontera. Estamos abiertos al diálogo y estamos dispuestos a escuchar, pero también necesitamos que nos escuchen. No podemos quebrar acuerdos ya pactados en la región, ni tampoco podemos negociar en desigualdad de condiciones. Mi país ha reiterado en distintas ocasiones también la importancia de la necesidad de acceder al Estatuto de Protección Temporal, TPS, para que nuestros migrantes guatemaltecos puedan trabajar legalmente en los Estados Unidos de América como se ha brindado a otros países. Es necesario construir juntos otras iniciativas que permitan y que favorezcan la migración segura, ordenada, regular, circular y ahora agregamos optativa. En Guatemala, la principal causa de la migración es la falta de oportunidades económicas. Es por esta razón que todas las iniciativas dirigidas a fomentar el desarrollo económico, generar empleo y frenar la migración irregular son parte de nuestras prioridades en el mediano y largo plazo. Por esta razón, el gobierno de Guatemala está invirtiendo 3 billones de dólares en la atención a las causas estructurales de la migración irregular. En el corto plazo, el gobierno otorga la mayor importancia al combate y la trata y el tráfico de migrantes. La realidad migratoria actual es compleja, ya que somos un país de origen, tránsito, destino y retorno. Sin embargo, nuestros principios han estado siempre enfocados en el pleno respeto a los derechos humanos de las personas migrantes. Abordar conjuntamente las causas multidisciplinares de la migración y generar el arraigo en la población bajo un enfoque de responsabilidad compartida es el camino correcto. Debe enfatizarse en la construcción de muros de prosperidad, como lo ha dicho también el presidente Alejandro Yamatei, que desestimule la migración por causas económicas, que podamos tener un interés compartido para realizar acciones en el corto y mediano y largo plazo para generar un desarrollo en las comunidades, particularmente los sectores más vulnerables. Por eso, reafirmo que para el gobierno del presidente, el doctor Alejandro Yamatei, el abordaje de la migración de manera integral no solo es necesario, sino que es una prioridad de nuestra política exterior. Señor presidente, es necesario resaltar las implicaciones que tienen los efectos del cambio climático y los desastres naturales. Debemos de tener presente que nuestro hemisferio se mantiene en constante estado de reconstrucción y recuperación, pues se enfrenta a múltiples riesgos concurrentes y simultáneos. En el caso de Guatemala, se le reconoce a nivel global como uno de los 10 países con mayor vulnerabilidad, aun cuando la subregión centroamericana solo genera el 0.35% de las emisiones de gases de los efectos de invernadero. Por este motivo, es importante destacar que Centroamérica es una de las regiones más vulnerables y amenazadas ante el cambio climático, lo cual ha generado graves consecuencias e impactos en el desarrollo. Sin embargo, en este tema no podemos pensar solo en nosotros. Deseo resaltar la grave situación que enfrentan los pequeños estados insulares de bajo litoral. El impacto que han tenido en este deterioro de nuestros vecinos del Caribe también ha sido devastador. Por tal motivo, dispuestos a trabajar conjuntamente con nuestros hermanos y de cara a proteger el Gran Caribe, trabajaremos también en la presidencia de la Asociación de Estados del Caribe para generar una agenda común, para llevar propuestas de desarrollo y que podamos juntos trabajar también de cara a todos los elementos necesarios para lograr la compensación y la recuperación. Señor presidente, Guatemala está comprometida en el rol de continuar contribuyendo en los procesos de desarrollo en la región. Nos enorgullecemos de promover la cooperación sur-sur al compartir esta vez el catálogo de oferta de cooperación internacional, que presenta una cartera de prácticas exitosas vinculadas a la dimensión social, económica y ambiental y al desarrollo sostenible. A través de este catálogo, sumamos nuestra voluntad de adhesión al estilo de cooperación basado en el multilateralismo y en la participación sistemática de todos los países y los nuevos esquemas de cooperación y desarrollo. La oferta sectorial que hoy ofrece Guatemala coloca a disposición de todas las Américas y se basa hoy en estos principios tan importantes que hoy conversamos de solidaridad, consenso y equidad. Señor presidente, el gobierno de Guatemala brinda una especial importancia al combate del narcotráfico. En consecuencia, se han fortalecido las medidas de seguridad y control terrestre, marítimo, aéreo en nuestro territorio, lográndose ampliar el número de incautaciones de drogas, identificar trazas aéreas, sus orígenes y destinos. Imagínense, solo en el año 2022, debido a diversos operativos institucionales que hemos implementado como gobierno, se han logrado incautar más de 1.213 kilos de cocaína. Imagínense ustedes que hemos podido tener y erradicar más de 8 millones de matas de marihuana. Y esto se ha ampliado también a otros programas en la erradicación de amapola. Asimismo, se ha logrado ampliar el número de personas extraditables por su vinculación al narcotráfico. Del año 2020 a la fecha, asumimos como gobierno el compromiso de extraditar a todas las personas vinculadas a este grave delito, las cuales ya suman 82 personas por narcotráfico y 21 personas por estos delitos, una cifra histórica para nuestra nación. ¿Por qué? Porque el narcotráfico es el mayor corruptor y lo estamos atacando de frente con resultados históricos. Hoy el mundo enfrenta el mayor reto de seguridad transnacional y alimentaria, por lo que no puedo dejar de mencionar el compromiso del gobierno de Guatemala con el pueblo ucraniano. Desde el inicio de la invasión ilegal, injustificada y provocada por la Federación de Rusia a la República de Ucrania en febrero de este año, Guatemala ha condenado de forma contundente en todos los foros y continúa haciéndolo por la violación a la soberanía y la integridad territorial de Ucrania. Hemos visto que en la comunidad de las Américas no podemos permanecer como espectadores ante esta terrible agresión, porque las consecuencias las vamos a vivir todos juntos si no hacemos algo juntos, como región y como países de vocación de paz. Esta posición va en consonancia también con el espíritu de la Carta de la OEA, y por eso lo menciono, que resguarda el anhelo de la convivencia pacífica, la solidaridad americana y la defensa de la soberanía, la integridad territorial y la independencia de los estados. Señor presidente, el espacio de diálogo que nos brinda esta Cumbre de las Américas es oportuno para que juntos marquemos el espíritu solidario que nos permita avanzar en la conciliación de formas de relacionamiento regional, adoptando un compromiso de convertirnos en aquellos promotores de las soluciones a los retos y desafíos y oportunidades de desarrollo a través de estrategias nuevas, innovadoras, constructivas, y que podamos hacer todos juntos en la manera que podamos en toda la América de manera articulada. Es importante mencionar que no puedo concluir mi intervención sin dejar de mencionar que el respeto a la integridad, la libre determinación de los pueblos, la democracia y el fortalecimiento de las instituciones son principios internacionales fundamentales que debe tener todos los países de este bello continente siempre presente. No podemos permitir que políticas diferentes, pensamientos distintos o tendencias que no compartimos pretendan debilitar maliciosamente nuestros propios principios y valores y que traten de imponernos agendas que violentan dichos principios y valores. Son las alianzas y la cooperación, estas que derivan de la mutua cooperación y diálogo, los que nos permitirán encontrarnos como países hermanos y abrir el espacio con organismos internacionales, no solo en estos foros, sino también diariamente con el sector privado, la sociedad civil, para que podamos generar la esperanza de que en un futuro podamos alcanzar nuestro máximo potencial. Esta cumbre nos dio la oportunidad de hoy pensar en la calidad de vida de nuestros ciudadanos, a quienes nos debemos. Quiero concluir reiterando el interés primordial para Guatemala de enfatizar que somos un país de vocación pacifista, promotor de la democracia, respetuoso del Estado de Derecho y de los principios constitucionales, pero especialmente de la defensa de nuestra soberanía. Hago un llamado por el fortalecimiento de la unidad, la hermandad de las Américas, para que seamos una sola voz para el mundo y un ejemplo de unidad fraternal, solidaria y respetuosa. Que Dios bendiga a Guatemala, pero especialmente que Dios bendiga a las Américas. Muchísimas gracias.
Before introducing our next guest, I've been asked to inform our delegates here today that the delegation of Guatemala has prepared a national report available to be collected at the Secretariat's table here. And for those of you who would be interested in that. Thank you. The chair now recognizes Enrique Reina, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation from the Republic of Honduras. Mr. Minister, we thank you. There you go.
Senador Chris Dodd, asesor especial de la Cumbre de las Américas. Quisiera antes de empezar agradecer en nombre de los centroamericanos su labor ardua para acabar una de las peores épocas que vivió Centroamérica en pro de los derechos humanos y para culminar épocas de intervención y la Guerra Fría que esperamos estén terminadas en la región. Excelencias, distinguidos delegados, pueblos de nuestra América. Es un honor estar aquí en Los Ángeles representando a la primera mujer presidenta de Honduras, Xiomara Castro Sarmiento, quien les envía un mensaje fraterno de unidad, de inclusión, de participación igualitaria, tanto a lo interno de nuestros países, en los que deben estar todas y todos, sin exclusiones por ninguna razón, ya sea género, origen, creencia, ideología, principio y cultura. todos pueblos hermanos, y que deben entenderse con la participación de los grupos tradicionalmente excluidos y hasta en algún momento perseguidos. Somos una América, una patria grande en su riqueza e inmensa diversidad. Todos los estados iguales somos parte de este gran y pujante continente. La presidenta Castro comparte todos los importantes temas y los acuerdos emanados de esta cumbre para buscar juntos soluciones y caminos para enfrentar los grandes retos que afronta nuestra región, tanto los internos como los externos, los choques de conflictos, el cambio climático, los desastres naturales y drama humano que constituye la migración de millones de personas, siendo América misma un continente que nace del choque de las culturas, pero de la riqueza que provocó el mestizaje y construcción de sociedades pluriculturales, plurinacionales y pluriétnicas. La migración es nuestra carta de nacimiento y es la base de nuestro crecimiento como naciones. Aquí nuestro saludo a los cientos de miles de migrantes que, como nuestros hondureños, contribuyen con su esfuerzo enorme con el desarrollo de varias naciones hermanas del continente americano. Para ellos abogamos en su trato digno y humanitario, como para todos los migrantes que circulan por las venas de esta América, con responsabilidad, entendiendo las diferencias y necesidades de cada uno. Igual agradeceremos enormemente la respuesta que se puede dar a nuestra solicitud para ampliación de un nuevo TPS para nuestros migrantes en los Estados Unidos. Por esa inclusión, por esa no exclusión, Honduras y la presidenta Castro decidió que todos debemos estar convocados, todos los países, sin exclusiones, en igualdad de condiciones. Del diálogo, de la confrontación de ideas, surgen las soluciones de todos los problemas que nos aquejan. Y lo decía un pensador hondureño, José Cecilio del Valle, en el siglo XIX, y cito: hijos de América diseminados por todos los climas, que forman una sola familia, una sola nación. América de día cuando escriba, América de noche cuando piense. Es el estudio más digno de un americano, es la América. Señor presidente, hemos discutido y agradecemos los trabajos del GRIC en la variedad de temas que son prioritarios, como los compromisos políticos en el Plan de Acción sobre Salud y Resiliencia de las Américas, el Programa Regional para la Transformación Digital, la aceleración de la transición hacia la energía limpia, sobre nuestro futuro sostenible y verde, y el Plan de Acción Interamericano sobre Gobernabilidad Democrática, entendiendo nuestras necesidades variables y que contribuyen a disminuir las enormes brechas entre nuestros niveles de desarrollo social, económico y político, entendiendo el respeto a la autodeterminación de los pueblos y la no injerencia en los asuntos internos de otros estados. Excelencias, todos enfrentamos grandes retos institucionales, estructurales, de derechos humanos, en el afianzamiento de la democracia y del Estado de Derecho. Todos los sistemas evolucionan en sus necesidades y al ritmo de los tiempos. Moralmente, en nuestro accionar, no nos podemos convertir en los jueces de otros estados, pueblos y naciones. En salud y resiliencia tenemos que trabajar para incrementar los trabajos para las debilidades que hizo evidente la pandemia COVID-19. Tenemos que evaluar y reforzar la capacidad y la resiliencia de los sistemas de salud y las cadenas de valor sanitarias a nivel nacional y regional, situando a la persona en el centro de las políticas e integrando la presencia del servicio de salud física y mental. El gobierno de la presidenta Castro coincide con estas prioridades, principalmente para enfocarse en estas grandes necesidades de las mujeres y las niñas y los niños y todos los grupos marginados históricamente y en situación de vulnerabilidad. El acceso a salud y la educación de todas y todos es prioritario. Debemos disminuir la gran brecha digital en países de la región, en comunidades rurales que apenas tienen acceso a la electricidad. La pandemia también demostró cómo el acceso a medios en línea es vital para la educación. La transformación digital es fundamental para eficientar la institucionalidad y el crecimiento económico. La energía limpia no es solo una prioridad regional. Honduras ha iniciado un proceso de reforma de todo su sector energético. Tenemos que transitar a sistemas más limpios y de bajas emisiones, pero para muchos países todavía tenemos que transformar un sector que en lugar de contribuir se convierte en un lastre para el desarrollo social y económico de los pueblos y para la competitividad y mejores espacios de inversión y crecimiento económico. Para ir hacia las energías limpias se requiere implementar acciones concretas de acceso a las tecnologías. Nuestro futuro, evidentemente, debe ser verde. Es un compromiso de todos en esta cumbre. La presidenta Castro ha iniciado un proceso para que se respeten las áreas protegidas. Se ha instruido en un nuevo rol a las Fuerzas Armadas para que cumplan una función de protección del medio ambiente. Honduras no emite ni siquiera el 1% del carbono que provoca el efecto invernadero, pero enfrenta los severos daños de desastres naturales año tras año, y ya comienza la temporada de huracanes nuevamente, como también lo enfrentan las naciones hermanas del Caribe. Debemos construir equilibrios entre el respeto al medio ambiente sin que se limiten las oportunidades de desarrollo de países que todavía no las hemos alcanzado. Señor presidente, en gobernabilidad y democrática, el afianzamiento del Estado de Derecho, la transparencia, el acceso a la justicia, el respeto a los derechos humanos, son otra serie de problemas que nos aquejan a varios niveles. No se deben permitir más injerencias ni golpes de Estados en ninguna nación del hemisferio, como el más reciente en Bolivia. En Honduras nos ha tomado 12 años y mucha oscuridad y muerte y dolor para retomar el sendero democrático de la mano del voto masivo y soberano del pueblo hondureño. La presidenta Castro representa precisamente esa nueva era para Honduras. La presidenta Castro ha estado trabajando de forma continua para fortalecer la institucionalidad en estos campos y se ha solicitado el apoyo de las Naciones Unidas para la instalación de una comisión internacional para la lucha contra la corrupción y la impunidad, solicitud que va avanzando por buen camino. Hay que fortalecer la confianza entre nuestras democracias mediante el cumplimiento de los compromisos sobre derechos humanos, gobernabilidad transparente y buenas prácticas regulatorias, anticorrupción y Estado de Derecho. Más allá de las palabras y grandes intenciones que surjan de esta cumbre, es la inventiva, la refundación de nuestro sistema interamericano lo que nos debe importar. En estas ideas compartimos las visiones expresadas en gran parte por México. Una América unida nos hará salir adelante. A pesar de las diferencias, enfrentamos los retos que provocan choques como la guerra en Ucrania que afecta a nuestras pequeñas economías y a todo el planeta. Una América sin medidas unilaterales, sin bloqueos, con acción. El accionar y convertir estas palabras de la cumbre en hechos es el mandato de nuestros pueblos. Finalizo agradeciendo al presidente Biden y al secretario de Estado Blinken, en especial, y a los Estados Unidos y a la ciudad de Los Ángeles por su hospitalidad. Excelencias, como decía José Martí, y cito, la América ha de promover todo lo que acerque a los pueblos y ha de abominar todo lo que los aparte. En esto, como en todos los problemas humanos, el prevenir es la paz. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. The Chair now recognizes His Excellency Marcelo Ebrard, the Foreign Minister of Mexico. And on a point of personal privilege, let me thank the Minister and thank him for his terrific work over the years. Mr. Minister, it's nice to see you.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Distinguidas, distinguidos representantes, mandatarios y personalidades que el día de hoy nos acompañan. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de manifestarnos frente a ustedes. En primer término, agradecer a los Estados Unidos al gobierno del presidente Biden, su equipo, así como al Estado de California y a la ciudad de Los Ángeles por la cálida recepción que nos han dado y por la excelente organización de esta cumbre. También saludar los avances, las conclusiones que se han presentado y que ya son del conocimiento público como fruto de esta cumbre, que tienen que ver con la prosperidad en América, la acción climática, la regulación de la migración y otras muy relevantes iniciativas. Pero déjenme concentrarme en un primer comentario en algo que se ha dicho en esta tribuna. Hemos estado, y su servidor ha hecho el esfuerzo de seguir las presentaciones de cada uno de los países, y eso ha sido una gran experiencia. He podido escuchar que 20 países de un total de 32 que nos hemos manifestado en esta alta tribuna de América han manifestado su inconformidad con la exclusión de países de las Américas que no están aquí entre nosotros. 20, 10 no se manifestaron, se abstuvieron, y 2 manifestaron o dijeron estar a favor de la exclusión. Resumo, la mayoría de los países que estamos aquí presentes en esta cumbre hemos manifestado nuestra oposición a que sean excluidos países de la Cumbre de las Américas. Y se preguntarán quienes nos están viendo, siguiendo, quienes nos escuchan, ¿y por qué nos oponemos a la exclusión de países? ¿Por qué es tan relevante ese tema? Fue tema hace una década. Cada cumbre ha sido tema. Es la gran diferencia. Es el elemento reiterado en estas cumbres que no se resuelve. ¿Por qué estamos en contra de la exclusión? Todos estos países, obviamente México coincide con esa posición. Por eso no vino el presidente López Obrador, para subrayar que no estamos de acuerdo. Decía yo, ¿por qué? Porque no se admite el principio de que pueda haber una intervención legítima. Es decir, nadie tiene el derecho de excluir a otro país por la razón que fuese, y menos porque haya una diferencia política respecto a su régimen político. ¿A quién le corresponde resolver la forma de organización política de cada nación? Al pueblo de cada nación, libremente escoger su forma de gobierno. Entonces, se está en contra de la exclusión y también del principio de que un país puede decirle a otro qué es lo que debe hacer en su vida interna. 20 en contra, 10 abstenciones, 2 a favor, 2 nada más. Me dirán ustedes, bueno, ¿y por qué es tan importante y tan reiterativo esto? Bueno, porque también se ha expresado aquí una crítica recurrente sobre la naturaleza, funciones y actual papel de la Organización de Estados Americanos, de su agotamiento, de su papel vergonzoso recientemente en Bolivia, de su obsesión con las observaciones electorales en lugar de los temas que interesan a todas las Américas. En la pandemia no los vimos. Eran más importantes las observaciones electorales o lo de Bolivia que ver cómo conseguíamos vacunas o cómo resolvíamos los problemas tan graves que tuvimos. Entonces, en varias de las intervenciones que me han precedido, notarán ustedes que entonces el tema no es solo si se excluye o no se excluye a unos países, que es muy importante, no es solo si se admite o no se admite el principio de intervención, que para México es absolutamente de no admitirse, como también he escuchado a 20 países antes que nosotros en esta cumbre, sino también otro elemento sustantivo, la arquitectura, fundamentos y función de la Organización de Estados Americanos está agotado. Es lo que hemos escuchado aquí. Se me dirá, bueno, ¿no está usted exagerando? No, estoy solamente recogiendo lo que he escuchado, más lo que es la posición nuestra también, nos unimos a ello. Dijo el presidente de la Argentina, Alberto Fernández, en esta tribuna, a nombre de la comunidad de estados latinoamericanos y caribeños, que debería renovarse de inmediato la dirigencia de la Organización de Estados Americanos y dar lugar a otra etapa en la forma en que estamos organizados en las Américas. Hay que hablar de eso se trata. Si no resolvemos eso y seguimos en esta diferencia sobre todo lo que acabo de describirles, si no damos un paso hacia adelante, pues probablemente en la próxima cumbre vamos a seguir discutiendo lo mismo. Es decir, tenemos acuerdos, tenemos iniciativas, pero sigue predominando la diferencia de los principios que les acabo de comentar y la forma de organización que tenemos hoy en día. Me parece que ha llegado el tiempo, el momento, en el que, por el bien de las Américas, debemos resolver esta diferencia. Entiendo, por supuesto, que para los Estados Unidos no es fácil tomar algunas de estas decisiones, pero es evidente que lo tenemos que hacer. ¿Cómo es posible que en una cumbre la mayor parte de los asistentes manifiesten su inconformidad y después no suceda nada? Pues tiene que suceder algo. ¿Qué es lo que proponemos? Siguiendo lo que hemos visto en la cumbre. Bueno, pues que nos propongamos que para la próxima cumbre esté resuelto esto, porque si no van a dejar de venir muchos países. Porque si no va a ser muy difícil que cumplamos las expectativas de nuestros pueblos. Es muy difícil cuando se tienen diferencias de ese calibre. ¿Qué se propone a los Estados Unidos? Y aquí tomé nota de lo que se fue diciendo a lo largo de la cumbre. Se le propone a Estados Unidos un nuevo acuerdo e iniciar una nueva etapa en la relación entre las Américas. Se le agradece su interés al presidente Biden de haber estado aquí, de escucharnos, de tener a su equipo tomando nota de lo que proponemos, de trabajar semanas para llegar a una declaración conjunta sobre temas tan complejos como la migración u otros. Por supuesto que eso es un gran mérito que todos reconocemos. Le interesan las Américas. Si no fuera así, pues no estaríamos aquí probablemente. Celebramos que así sea. Reconocemos todas y todos que estamos en una nueva realidad geopolítica. No es el mismo mundo el que estamos viviendo hoy que el de la última cumbre que tuvimos. Ahora estamos en una guerra en Ucrania por la invasión de Rusia a Ucrania. Tenemos una inestabilidad alimentaria y energética. Una nueva realidad geopolítica que aconseja buscar la unidad. Pero para buscar la unidad sí tenemos que resolver lo que acabo de describirles a ustedes, porque si no la diferencia va a seguir imperando en estas cumbres, como lo ha hecho cuando menos los últimos 10 años. Y para ello hay que tomar decisiones. Por ejemplo, de todos los países que estamos aquí, en junio del 2021, votamos en contra del bloqueo a Cuba 29 países. Se abstuvieron 2 y 1 votó a favor en la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas. ¿Qué quiere decir? Pues tenemos que resolver. Es un bloqueo en contra del derecho internacional, en contra de los derechos humanos que queremos proteger. Así se votó, ahora no, repito, en la Asamblea General de la ONU, pero lo hemos votado 28 veces. ¿Qué no ya llegó el momento de cambiar eso? ¿No llegó el momento de iniciar una nueva etapa en la relación entre las Américas, en sus diferentes vertientes, entre Estados Unidos, América Latina y Caribe, que nos caracterice la unidad de la que todos hemos hablado? Bueno, pues se requiere esto. Amigas, amigos, compañeras, compañeros, México desea subrayar esto que se ha manifestado con una visión positiva, constructiva. No hay un país que no haya manifestado en esta tribuna que le gustaría tener una cercana, respetuosa relación con los demás países que conformamos las Américas y, en primer lugar, por supuesto, refiriéndonos al anfitrión de esta Cumbre de las Américas, que son los Estados Unidos. Entonces, me parece que están dados los elementos para que podamos avanzar, para que podamos dar los pasos subsecuentes que nos lleven a esa nueva unión. Ya no la Organización de Estados Americanos, ya no el intervencionismo electoral, ya no las misiones que nos quieren certificar, porque no reconocemos que nadie nos certifique. Somos países independientes, soberanos y orgullosos. Y yo vengo de un país democrático, respetuoso de las libertades de las personas. Estuvimos años en la oposición para hacer hoy gobierno. Entonces, ya no ese intervencionismo electoral. Estamos perdiendo lo más por lo menos. Viviendo en el pasado, en el siglo anterior. Entonces, todo está dado para que demos esos pasos subsecuentes, formemos un equipo que prepare eso, que acuerde eso, que lo que han dicho aquí nuestros jefes de gobierno, jefes de Estado y cancilleres se traduzca en ese paso adelante, que no se quede en una manifestación nada más de nuestros sentimientos, sino en un programa político. Cambiemos la Organización de Estados Americanos, ya se agotó. Que se levante el bloqueo de Cuba, que se dialogue con todos y que se respete a todos. Y eso es lo que es el sentimiento general que he observado en esta asamblea. Señalar también que es de reconocerse el trabajo que ha encabezado el presidente Biden y la vicepresidenta de Estados Unidos para conseguir inversiones en Centroamérica, para atender planteamientos que hemos hecho varios países aquí también presentes, su interés en que pueda haber opciones para las personas, que evitemos la migración forzada. Eso es de reconocer, es un gran punto de encuentro. Lo respaldamos, es el caso de México, de muchos países que han hecho uso de esta tribuna. Quiero también decir que México respalda por completo el compromiso del presidente Biden de regularizar 11 millones de mexicanos que están aquí. Algunos llevan 40 años. No han podido regresar a México porque no tienen derechos reconocidos. Y el presidente Biden se ha propuesto modificar eso. Desde luego que lo vemos con profunda simpatía y gratitud. Entonces, no se trata de una controversia contra Estados Unidos. Nosotros tenemos una muy buena relación con Estados Unidos y respetamos profundamente al presidente Biden y el valor que ha tenido para plantear muchos de los elementos que acabo de describir y otros, como por ejemplo el cambio de la contribución fiscal de las grandes corporaciones u otros temas que él ha tenido la valentía de tocar. No se trata de eso, al contrario. Como lo reconocemos, como tenemos esa cercanía con los Estados Unidos, es que proponemos que llegó el momento de cambiar, como todas y todos ustedes cuando han hecho uso de la palabra en los últimos 2 días. Muchas gracias por su atención y estoy seguro que este planteamiento va a llevar a que esta sea la última cumbre en donde estemos discutiendo una organización agotada como la Organización de Estados Americanos, última cumbre que tengamos que discutir el bloqueo a Cuba y última cumbre que nos falten los pueblos de Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela o cualquier otro pueblo. Muchas gracias.
The chair now recognizes Her Excellency Thelma Brown, the Ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United States. Madam Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Dodd. Heads of government of the Americas, heads of delegations, excellencies, observers, heads of organizations, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct pleasure to address this august gathering in the vibrant multicultural city of Los Angeles. I bring you warm fraternal greetings from the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Permit me to express profound apologies on behalf of our esteemed Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, who would have loved to have been here, but the exigencies of matters of state have precluded his attendance. He sends his best wishes for a fruitful summit. Distinguished Chair, allow me to extend my delegation's deepest appreciation to your government and people for hosting the 9th Summit of the Americas and for your excellent hospitality. This summit comes at a moment of a convergence of global crises. But yes, we can turn these crises into opportunities to build back better. The theme of the summit, building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future, is therefore a timely one as our countries navigate our way out of the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. As a region, the Americas was the most severely affected. Home to less than 15% of the global population, the hemisphere accounted for approximately 29.5% of confirmed COVID-19 cases, and sadly, 43% of global deaths. The government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis, therefore, believes it is incumbent upon us all to cultivate a mind to work if we are to restore, rebuild, and collectively advance towards a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for the people of the Americas. No nation should be left out or behind if we are to extract the greatest positive outcomes for the greatest number of people in our hemisphere. We envisage then, Mr. Chairman, that a region diverse in culture, but intrinsically linked by geographic proximity and common challenges, should emerge as one that is integrated, inclusive, productive, prosperous, and peaceful. We further believe that each child born to every household in this hemisphere, be it one of the over 17,000 households in St. Kitts and Nevis, the 130 million plus or thereabout households in the US, or approximately 3.1 million households in Cuba, should be afforded an enabling environment to achieve his or her fullest potential to become a resilient, creative, and productive citizen, equipped to deal with our region's challenges, be they health, environmental, technological, economical, or governance-related. To this end, St. Kitts and Nevis urges the government of the United States of America to consider ending the economic embargo against the Republic of Cuba. Had it not been for Cuba, many countries in the Caribbean would not have withstood the onslaught of the coronavirus. Cuba's world-renowned healthcare sector should be a source for hemispheric pride, and their voice at the summit would have been invaluable for building sustainable, resilient, and equitable global health. The same could be said of our brothers and sisters in Venezuela as we tackle an energy crisis fueled in part by geopolitical fights from another century. It is hoped that this summit provides the impetus to eschew 20th century conflicts and truly focus on the fights of the future, the fight for people, the fight for planet, the fight for prosperity, all necessary for the attainment of peace. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis wishes to place on record its sincerest appreciation to the United States and indeed to all hemispheric partners who supported us throughout the pandemic. Your vital cooperation enabled us to open sooner, safer, and stronger. It is in this spirit, therefore, that we pledge to dedicate efforts at the national level to achieve the well-intentioned outcomes of the draft political commitments on health and resilience in the Americas, regional agenda on digital transformation, accelerating the sustainable, clean, renewable, and just energy transition, or sustainable green future, as well as the Inter-American Action Plan on democratic governance. We highly value the yeoman efforts that were invested into creating these documents, which would serve as a roadmap for action. Mr. Chairman, St. Kitts and Nevis is pleased to report that we have begun significant work in many of these areas which mirror our foreign and development policy. Nonetheless, these political commitments will certainly serve to give us greater impetus to prioritize these matters on our national agenda and to employ more concrete action to facilitate the necessary implementation. In the area of health and resilience, partnerships with the Social Security Board, the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the Ministry of Sustainable Development, and the Pan American Health Organization, among others, have been established in order to effect the seamless rollout of the Universal Healthcare Program by the first quarter of 2023. Cognizant that 75% of infectious diseases are traceable to the increasing interface between man and the animal and plant environment, we are also committed to the implementation of the IHR 2005 and the One Health approach to the pursuit of global health security. Our advocacy against chronic non-communicable disease is vibrant, and the battle to decrease our proportion of the premature deaths from NCDs in our hemisphere is enjoined at the highest level as our Prime Minister promotes and leads health walks periodically. The ramifications of the pandemic and the vagaries of geopolitics highlight how central food is to our health and well-being. My country views the development of the agriculture systems and sector as foundational to resilience and is acting in line with CARICOM and through AICA to invest in food and nutrition security. We posit that food security is an area replete with low-hanging fruit and is ripe for inter-American cooperation. The digital transformation strategy of St. Kitts and Nevis was launched in 2019 to make doing business with government more efficient. We are very pleased that the political commitment on digital transformation aligns with government's plans for transforming the Federation into a digital economy. We believe special emphasis should be placed on the vulnerability of small island developing states as it relates to our telecommunications and infrastructure in general, considering our exposure to climatic and external shocks. We therefore call for the appropriate resources, financial, technical, and human, to be mobilized to assist SIDS. We anticipate this will be done in consultation and partnership with major tech firms across the hemisphere, paving the way for coherence, complementarity, and public-private partnerships, a key ingredient for building resilience and sustainability. Mr. Chairman, St. Kitts and Nevis believes that an energy system based on renewables is the only model that can fuel a resilient future, and our national determined contribution foresees a dynamic mix of renewable energy. Currently, a solar farm is being constructed on St. Kitts and is projected to be completed in 2024. This solar farm is expected to be one of the largest of its kind in the region. A geothermal project on Nevis is also earmarked for future investment as we strive towards a cleaner and greener future. Accordingly, the Pact 2030, an initiative to ensure energy security and climate resistance, launched by President Biden, is timely and most welcome by us all. St. Kitts and Nevis continues to pursue the promotion of democratic governance. The Integrity in Public Life Act was passed in 2013 and came into full effect on 11 July 2018. This act highlights the code of conduct for public officials and addresses abuse and misconduct in public office. Additionally, we consistently enjoy positive reviews regarding the conduct of our elections, which have been deemed free and fair and free from fear by successive observer groups. As the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton, a founding father of this country, St. Kitts and Nevis stands as a flag bearer for a dynamic democratic state. Finally, Excellencies, it gives me great pride to reiterate the commitment of St. Kitts and Nevis in the spirit of inter-American cooperation towards deepening the regional integration process by calling on all states to promote frank dialogue, mutual respect, and broad-based inclusivity as we seek to resolve issues in our hemisphere and look to the future to fight what really matters, the betterment of our peoples and sustainability of our planet. Let it be said that when we leave this summit, we leave with a firm commitment to tangible deliverables that will put our hemisphere on a path to enhance productivity, prosperity, and peace, and may history so record. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much, Senator. May God bless us all, and may God bless our hemisphere. Thank you.
Well, my friends, as the president of our final plenary of the 9th Summit of the Americas, together we've discussed some of the most pressing issues facing our hemisphere, and together we have committed to concrete steps to build a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for the people of the Americas. I want to mention two things, and acting in my own right if I can. We not only celebrate at this summit or tolerate the diversity of opinions expressed by those nations who are here and the people who've spoken on their behalf, we celebrate, in fact, not just merely tolerate, but celebrate the diversity of views We may disagree with a particular point of view, but we all, I believe, strongly would do everything possible to make sure that people have the right to express those views. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that specifically. On a personal basis, I just know because I have several of people who I've known for many, many years, dating back to my youth, today in either under house arrest or arrest in Nicaragua. And I want to, at least for myself anyway, hope that those people will be released from incarceration. Their sin or crime was opposition to views. And so while we gather here to celebrate democracy, to celebrate freedom and those matters, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. The last thing I want to do is to express to the people of this city of Los Angeles and the many hundreds of people that all of us ran into for that cup of coffee, that meal, working all day, literally hundreds and hundreds of people have prepared for months the preparation for this summit. And so as a final act, I wish to ask you to join you in expressing our thanks to the people who have made this summit on a technical basis, if you will, every day, to thank them profusely for their commitment to make this a great, great summit, and to thank all of you for being a part of it. So we a round of applause to all of you. Okay. Thank you for joining us in Los Angeles, and looking forward to our continuing cooperation. Thank you all very, very much. Stand adjourned.
It has been nearly 3 decades since the United States hosted the first Summit of the Americas. As it happens, I actually worked on that inaugural summit in a slightly different role. I was a speechwriter for President Clinton at the time. Needless to say, the hemisphere looks a little bit different than it did back in 1994. But the fundamental premise of that first summit still holds. No region more directly affects the lives of American citizens, their security, their prosperity, than the Americas. And at the same time, the concentration of democracies in our hemisphere gives us a unique advantage as we try to meet the fundamental needs of people across the region. This summit comes at a challenging time. We heard that from many this week. COVID-19 has taken the lives of 2.7 million people across the Americas. If you add it all up, we're about 12% of the world's population. We suffered 40% of global reported deaths. No region has felt more acutely the pandemic's economic and social consequences, from rising poverty to more young people out of work. Just as we began to build back from the pandemic, the Russian government's brutal war of aggression in Ukraine worsened many problems across the hemisphere, raising the cost of fuel, fertilizer, and food, making it tougher for producers to export their goods. These headwinds come atop long-standing challenges in the region, including a lack of opportunity, an accelerating climate crisis, violence and insecurity, endemic corruption, all of which are driving people to leave their home countries in record numbers in search of places where they have a better shot at providing for themselves and their loved ones. The more people across the region feel these challenges in their everyday lives, the more they are looking for effective governance to help address them. And that's been the guiding principle behind the Biden administration's engagement in our region. That's why we donated more than 70 million doses and counting of safe, effective COVID-19 vaccines to countries across the hemisphere, free of charge, with no strings attached. It's why the American public and private sectors continue to invest more than any other country in expanding economic opportunity across the hemisphere. From the $10 billion that the U.S. Development Finance Corporation has distributed to projects like that are providing low-interest loans to women entrepreneurs, for example, to the $1.3 trillion that the United States provides in annual foreign direct investment to the Americas. It's also why I convened my partners from across the hemisphere, first in Colombia, then in Panama, to focus on what we can do collectively to address the root causes of the region's migration crisis. Increase economic support for the countries that are hosting the largest numbers of refugees and migrants, including the more than 6 million displaced Venezuelans. Expand protections for migrants who are at risk. These efforts were crucial to shaping what is now the first truly regional approach to migration in the Los Angeles Declaration. Thanks to President Biden's leadership, it was adopted by leaders of 20 countries in the hemisphere, including our own, just a few hours ago. We expect more to sign on to this soon. What the declaration reflects is something new, and that is a commitment to shared responsibility when it comes to dealing with the migration challenge, shared responsibility, and shared action. We're also marshaling real resources behind this effort. The Vice President has led the way in generating $3.2 billion in new private sector investment through her call to action in the countries of Northern Central America. This summit isn't the beginning or the end of our efforts to make democracy deliver in the hemisphere. Rather, it's a chance to engage with partners from around the region, in government, international organizations, civil society, the private sector, young people, about where we can do more and where we can do better. That included engaging with people from the countries that are not democracies, where voicing criticism of government, standing up for human rights, or doing independent journalism is met with systematic, and swift repression. I met with activists and human rights leaders, including from Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. I was struck by their determination. Despite serious harassment, attacks, violence, a determination to keep fighting for human rights and democracy in their countries. As for the governments of those countries, this summit focused on collaborating with partners to respond to the practical needs of people across the hemisphere. It's hard to do that with governments that reject the basic principle that they're accountable to their people and repress their citizens' rights to speak up about the challenges they face. As a result of President Biden's leadership in bringing the summit together and driving broad support for its deliverables, we have a lot to show for this week's work. Together, our countries agreed to ambitious commitments in public health and pandemic preparedness, clean energy, climate change adaptation, digital transformation, democratic governance. These commitments give us benchmarks to hold us accountable by our fellow democracies and by the people that we serve. The United States announced new commitments to move these efforts forward, and let me just quickly highlight a few. Together with partners, we will train and equip 500,000 local healthcare workers across the hemisphere over the next 5 years so that more people can get quality care in their communities. We announced a new economic agenda, the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, that's focused on building more equitable growth from the bottom up and from the middle out. We'll bring more countries into the partnership over the coming months. A key part of the agenda will be working with multilateral institutions to increase financing for the region's middle-income economies, which aren't developed enough to qualify for membership in groups like the G20 or the OECD, and yet are too developed to qualify for aid from international financial institutions like the World Bank. This is something that we heard loud and clear from our partners in CARICOM as well as others. So, to that end, President Biden is proposing fundamental reforms to the Inter-American Development Bank so that it can invest in middle-income countries. As the bank's largest donor, the United States will put more resources into the bank's private sector lending arm to support these kinds of investments. We're also turbocharging our efforts to support the region's transition to clean energy. Here at the summit, 5 new countries announced that they plan to join the Renewable Energy for Latin America and Caribbean initiative. That brings us to 20 countries teaming up to hit an unprecedented target, producing 70% of the hemisphere's electricity through renewable energy by the year 2030. We announced a new partnership to invest in clean energy programs and climate adaptation and resilience across the Caribbean, and expanded regional efforts to protect and conserve our oceans. In no small part, thanks to the extraordinary work of our climate envoy, John Kerry, regional development banks committed $50 billion over 5 years to help countries reduce emissions, expand renewable energy, address the growing climate crisis. We'll work with the banks going forward to ensure that the funding helps lower the barriers and risks to investing in a sustainable future, making it not only economically viable, but desirable for the private sector. As part of our commitment to strengthen democracy, the United States committed $75 million in new support for over 300 community-led organizations across the Americas that are on the front lines of advancing human rights, lifting more people out of poverty, fighting corruption. USAID will devote an additional $42 million to aiding civil society in Central America, part of what is really a whole-of-government commitment to promoting freedom of expression, countering digital repression, defending other spaces where citizens engage in their democracies. Finally, we plan to host the first ever City Summit of the Americas in Denver, Colorado, next April, 2023. This will foster greater cooperation among city, state, regional leaders, together with business, with youth, with NGOs. What we are already seeing is that cities are the leading innovators in bringing citizens and governments together to actually solve concrete real-world problems, and we've got a lot to learn from them. We have also, as part of this, the Cities Forward initiative, which will draw on the knowledge and expertise from across our own government to help cities meet their goals for becoming more equitable, more environmentally sustainable. So, in sum, I think it's fair to say that we've emerged from the summit clear-eyed about the challenges that we face and more aligned on the way forward, together, building on our strength as democracies, and knowing, as President Biden said, that at heart we have everything that we need right here in our own hemisphere, in the Americas, everything we need to deliver for our people. So, with that, thank you. Happy to take some questions.
We will now turn to questions. We'll start with Xiomara Castro of Reuters.
Hello, Secretary Blinken. I have a couple of questions, so please bear with me. Some countries who were present here today at the summit chose not to sign up for the migration declaration. What were their reservations, and how is the United States going to address those going forward? How many do you think can be on board by the end of the year? And with this declaration, do you expect a record number of migrant arrivals at the border to fall? That was my first question. My second one is, many leaders expressed their discontent to U.S. excluding Cuba and Venezuela, and they raised concerns about the unity in the region. What will the administration do to ease those concerns, and could that trigger a rethink of U.S. policy towards the region? Thanks.
Thanks, Mara. So first, on the LA Declaration on migration, I'm not sure if you were in the room, but if you looked at that stage, there were 20 countries represented on that stage. And as I said, this is the first time that we've come together across the hemisphere to take shared responsibility for the migration challenge. Countries of origin, transit countries, countries of destination. And this is a significant step forward in my judgment, because it actually promises, I think, more effective action in making sure that we have humane, orderly, safe migration. A few things that I would just point to in the declaration itself, because it's important. The commitments that governments made include to expand temporary worker programs, to address labor shortages while reducing irregular migration. This is a real win-win. It's a win-win for countries like the United States, Canada, Mexico. They committed to open and expand or reinforce other legal channels for migration, including refugee resettlement, family unification programs. That too will help address critical labor shortages. There's a commitment to surge support to countries that are hosting large refugee and migrant populations to make sure that that's sustainable, because we see the burden that this places on communities in different parts of our hemisphere. There's a commitment to combat and root out human smuggling networks that prey on the most vulnerable in the region. So that's a very strong, principled foundation. 20 countries are on board. My full expectation is that more will join as we go forward. At the same time, one of the things we're doing is working directly with other countries with migration arrangements, so that we're looking in individual cases at what specific steps individual countries might take, again, to help manage this challenge effectively. So what will the results be? We'll see. We want to make sure that we're measuring our progress, but this is an important vehicle for actually making progress in managing the migration challenge effectively. I mentioned as well, we know that even as we're taking short-term and near and medium-term steps to manage migration, ultimately the long-term investments that we're trying to make in countries from which so many people are leaving are ultimately what are going to make the most difference. And there, as I mentioned, at this summit, the Vice President was able to announce that thanks to her work, we have an additional $3.2 billion in investment from the private sector going to the countries of North and Central America. Over time, what that does is it creates opportunity. One of the biggest single drivers of migration is a lack of opportunity. If we and others can help create it, that's going to make a big difference. It will give people a choice. So this will play out over time. There's some immediate measures, and some of this is medium term, some of this is longer term. As to the second part of the question, first, let me say this. In the case of Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, they were here at the summit. I met with them. I met with human rights defenders. I met with civil society from those countries. And I would argue that they are more representative of the people in those respective countries than their current governments or regimes. Some other countries were here at the foreign minister level, but fully in force. We had, I think, all told, about 68 delegations, 22 heads of state. And it's interesting. I know some people like to focus on differences of opinion in who is here, but everyone was fully united on what we did here. And I recited some of the concrete achievements of the summit. That was the focus of virtually all of the conversations that I had over the last 3 days.
We will turn to Missy Ryan of the Washington Post.
Hi, Secretary Blinken.
Missy.
You went over this very ambitious list of deliverables that was announced during the summit, but it was unclear to me, at least, whether there will be a large amount of new U.S. government investments associated with those, especially in comparison to some of the recent U.S. government support for Ukraine, for example. And I understand the argument that much of the region is now middle income. But at the same time, we heard some really poignant appeals from Caribbean nations and others saying that they're mired in debt due to climate change that is caused largely by big countries like the United States, and they're drowning in violence caused in large part by U.S. origin guns. Do you think perhaps the U.S. has a greater financial responsibility given its role in, contributing to these problems? And secondly, I want to press you a little bit more on an issue you discussed with Televisa. And that's the complaint that we heard from a number of countries, including Gabriel Boric, when he spoke with the Washington Post this week, about a double standard in U.S. engagement with and support for some countries with problematic governments and rights records, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other countries which, as you said, are not accountable to their people, and then choosing not to engage with other ones. I'm just going to have to sit down so I can read this. I heard you say that you are trying to see how you can stand up for people more effectively, but could you be more specific in telling us how you think about when to engage in some countries with issues and when not to engage? And do you think that these leaders who are making that point do have a point? Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Missy. So first, on the question raised very eloquently and powerfully by our partners in the Caribbean. This is something the President, Vice President were extremely sensitive to. We had what I thought was an excellent meeting between the President, the Vice President, and our CARICOM partners yesterday. Now, again, don't take it from me. Ask them what they thought. Certainly what I heard from them coming out of the meeting, what I heard today is that this is, as one of them put it, the best meeting we've had in a decade with the leadership of the United States. And the reason it was such a good meeting is, first of all, because the President and Vice President listened intently to the concerns expressed by countries in the Caribbean and responded, I think, effectively to them. You pointed to something really important. There is a different kind of middle income trap where countries are classified as being middle income or even higher income, and yet they are particularly afflicted by COVID or the climate crisis. They don't have the means to respond, and yet they don't qualify for example, concessionary lending. Or they have so much debt piled up that even if they could qualify, they've got a problem. So we are committed to tackling this problem. And the President is engaged to working with the multilateral development banks to find ways to effectively support countries that are in this position. to make sure that they can get the support they need for example, climate adaptation, or to respond to the food crisis, or to respond to a health crisis. I think, again, if you ask our colleagues from the Caribbean, they will, I suspect, tell you that they very much appreciated the work that was done. And so much so that one of the agreements that came out of the meeting yesterday was to immediately establish a working group between the United States and the CARICOM countries to work through these practical problems and to make sure that we are actually seized by the fierce urgency of now. Not next year, not in 5 years, now. Second part of the question. With any given country, we are looking at a multiplicity of interests, but also a common thread of values. President Biden committed to putting human rights and democracy at the heart of our foreign policy. It is, but that doesn't mean that it's the totality. It's a critical element that we look to, and we're always trying to assess in any given relationship where we think we can be most effective, both in advancing our interests, but doing it in a way that is consistent with and advances our values at the same time. That is simply going to differ from country to country, even though that thread runs throughout. So, for example, in the case of Saudi Arabia, which you mentioned, we determined early on that it was important to recalibrate the relationship to make sure that it better reflected, in our judgment, our interests and values, but to do it in a way that didn't rupture the relationship. It's a tremendously important relationship and partnership in terms of combating extremism, in terms of dealing with Iran. Tremendously important as well in trying to bring to an end one of the worst conflicts in the world over the last decade that's been perhaps the worst humanitarian crisis on the globe, and that's the conflict in Yemen. And in part as a result of the work that we've been able to do with the leadership of Saudi Arabia, we helped achieve a truce in Yemen that's now been extended for a second period of time. Humanitarian assistance is getting to places where it couldn't before. And we have an opportunity, fragile, but a real opportunity to maybe have a sustained peace in Yemen. So this is about getting results, doing it in a principled way. We could go down the list of each country, different situations in each, but our focus is the same. How can we most effectively advance America's interests, but also America's values?
We'll go to Ariel Moutsadas of Televisa.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I would like to know, in the declaration of Los Angeles, and senior officials also from the United States government have said that all countries should enforce, or that the United States expects all countries to enforce their own immigration laws. Could you please elaborate on what type of enforcement actions you have been discussing, especially in the case of Mexico? Thank you.
Thank you. If you look at the declaration, it, as I said, sets out some basic principles, and it sets out commitments by governments to do certain things. The basic principles that we agree to are the absolute need to make sure that migration is safe, it's orderly, it's humane. And we want to make sure that we're putting human dignity at the heart of everything that we do. And that means making sure that migrants are treated in a humane and dignified way, that we build in safety along the entire process of migration, but at the same time that we uphold and respect our individual laws and that those laws be enforced. So all of that is in the declaration. I went through, I won't belabor it again, I went through the specific commitments that governments have undertaken as part of the declaration in all aspects of migration, again, to include things like expanded temporary worker programs, to include things like creating more legal channels for migration, support for communities that are hosting many refugees and migrants, and combating and rooting out smuggling networks. But in all of this, we expect that countries will, just as the United States will, uphold and enforce its laws. Those are all, I think, relatively self-evident. I'm not going to go through them for each country. I mentioned as well that with this declaration that covers now 20 countries in the hemisphere, we've also been engaged with individual countries on arrangements that go to even more specific things that countries can do, particularly when it comes to protections for migrants in their system, but also when it comes, for example, to repatriating migrants to the countries they came for, enforcing their laws to do that, seeking agreement with other governments to do that. There's a long list of things. Thank you.
Gabby Peroso, VPI TV.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Thank you. While we are here at the summit, Maduro is currently visiting Iran and Turkey, and he is also talking directly with Russia and China. Are you concerned that they can sign an agreement offering more things to the regime than you? Maduro refused to return to the dialogue in Mexico. Do you believe it is worth it for the U.S. to continue easing sanctions? You are placing all your hope on the negotiations, but what other alternative are the U.S. exploring besides Mexico? And another question. Right. What can we expect in the months to come as the U.S. administration shifts its attention to its other urgent and pressing matters? How can Latin America stay as a priority spot for you? Will a massive migration wave convince you that the region is both political and security priorities? Your enemies are in the region using the immigration card to unsettle the U.S. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. First, when it comes to negotiations and Venezuela, both the unitary platform and the Maduro regime in recent days have signaled an intent to resume those conversations or negotiations in Mexico City. That is the latest information that we have. That's what we're looking toward. And in our judgment, Venezuelan-led negotiations between the Maduro regime and the unitary platform are the best path that we can see to trying to restore to Venezuelans a democracy that they clearly deserve and clearly want, and alleviate the extraordinary suffering that's taken place in recent years. We're very much committed to supporting Venezuelans in this effort, and certainly their democratic aspirations under the right circumstances. With the support of the international community, the parties themselves are best positioned to negotiate steps toward a solution to the Venezuelan crisis. So again, the most recent information we have is that there's an intent to return to Mexico City, and that's something that we support. We've also made clear that when it comes to sanctions, sanctions are not an end in themselves. They are an effort to incentivize those who are on the receiving end to engage in different conduct. And as we've long said, sanctions aren't permanent. If we see change, the sanctions can be lifted. The purpose is not to keep them there indefinitely. The purpose is to encourage countries, regimes, governments to engage in the right kind of conduct, particularly when it comes to restoring democracy. That's the purpose. The second part of the question, how can Latin America remain a priority? Well, first, I think we've spent almost a week here. I got here on Tuesday, and the President's been here for several days, making very clear that even in the midst of, for example, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, even in the midst of the broad challenge that, for example, China poses to us, that our own hemisphere is a priority. As I said, this summit brought together some 68 delegations, 22 heads of state. But what's really important are not the 3 days here, it's the 362 days that will follow in the year ahead. And the test is going to be whether we make good on the commitments that we've made here. I recited a number of them. You, but more importantly, through you, in a sense, our citizens, will hold us accountable to whether we actually deliver on these commitments. And if we're going to do that, we have to stay engaged. We can't just write a declaration, put it in a drawer, and expect it to produce results. This requires sustained, day in, day out engagement by our government, by other governments, by the private sector, by civil society, international organizations, etc. But the real answer to the test will probably be, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, when we look back and determine whether we've made good on the commitments that were reached here in Los Angeles.
I'll take a final question from Raquel Crowdenbuhl from Globo.
Hello.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Secretary Blinken. I also have 2 questions. I'll ask one first and then you'll answer. And I ask the second. Is that okay? First question, President Bolsonaro said today, you were there during his speech, that Brazil is one of the countries that most preserve the environment. What is your reaction to that? And do you see real progress on Brazil's commitment on cutting deforestation?
Raquel, do you want to go ahead and ask your second?
Okay, sure. Sure. On the first bilateral meeting between President Biden and Bolsonaro yesterday, before the meeting, a senior administration official said they were discussing topics they disagree on. Bolsonaro defended a lot of his old positions there. So what do you think about his statement there? What were the disagreements? And what changed for the bilateral relationship now?
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me talk about the climate piece first. Look, I think it is well known that climate change is a top priority for our administration, but also for countries in the hemisphere. This was very much front and center in the conversations we had. Many of the countries here, of course, were together with us at COP26. So this is an enduring focus for us. And it's also fundamentally true that Brazil is critical to these efforts. It has one of the cleanest energy grids, as it already stands, but of course it's also one of the top emitters of greenhouse gases, as is the United States. The Amazon, which we know are literally the lungs of the hemisphere, stores enormous quantities of carbon dioxide each year, and that is a vital service to the world in dealing with climate change that we cannot afford to lose. So we've been concerned by the continuing high levels of deforestation in the Amazon, a concern that we've expressed. It's also why we put additional resources through something called Amazonia Connect to support Brazil, Colombia, Peru's efforts to preserve the Amazon. One of the things that President Biden shared with President Bolsonaro is that we feel a responsibility to do that because over many generations, we were able to take advantage ourselves, for example, of clearing forests in order to have agricultural production or industry before anyone understood the impact of climate change. And now, as we're asking other countries not to engage in these kinds of steps, we believe that we have a responsibility to help. And that goes with, for example, helping to finance adaptation, resilience, and in the case of deforestation, making sure that countries have the means not to further engage in deforestation or even to engage in reforestation. So we discussed all of this. Brazil has put forward very ambitious climate commitments. We hope that they hold to those commitments. It would make a huge difference in this effort that has to be a global one. And more broadly, let me say this. We have, I think, over many years, a strong, solid partnership. It spans centuries, quite literally, based on shared democratic values, based on a lot of mutual interests. The bilateral yesterday was, I think, best described as constructive, an opportunity to address a lot of issues in the bilateral relationship right now. I don't want to put words in President Bolsonaro's mouth, but I think I heard him say today that it was productive and positive, and we too appreciate the close coordination on a whole range of issues. For example, we talked about boosting trade, investment, job creation, working together on the environment, as I just mentioned, social and security issues with Brazil. And our hope, I think there's a common belief and also expectation that if we work more closely together, we can actually deliver real benefits for people in both of our countries. We happen to be the two largest democracies in the hemisphere. It makes sense for us to not only continue to work together, but find ways to deepen the partnership. So I think the President's had a good conversation yesterday about how we can move forward in that direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is something that has happened on a somewhat regular basis in the past. I think even a couple of times a year. Countries will make their sovereign decisions. However, the idea that Russia would be a good partner when it comes to law enforcement issues or when it comes to humanitarian assistance, shall we say, does not meet the credibility test. Thank you.
Very much.